People often speak of Neanderthals as strong hunters, but few ever think about how the women survived. Without them, there would have been no tribe and no future. They gave birth, fed, taught, and cared. Their lives were no easier than the men's, just quieter. And here is what that life looked like. Pregnancy for a Neanderthal woman was not a matter of choice, but part of the tribe's survival. If a woman did not give birth, the group died out. There was no medicine, no midwives, no protection from pain. A woman became pregnant and continued living as usual, gathering food, tending the fire, working hides. A growing belly was no excuse to rest. Birth happened right in the cave or under a shelter made of hides. Other women, mothers, sisters, elders, were likely nearby. They could help, share knowledge, offer comfort. But if something went wrong, no one could save her. If the baby got stuck or there was heavy bleeding, it almost always meant death. Skeletons of women from that time often show signs of injuries related to difficult births. A Neanderthal woman had a wide pelvis. Nature had adapted, but the baby still had a large head. Like modern infants, it was an ordeal. Women likely gave birth sitting or squatting, holding on to something for better control. If the birth went well, the mother and child stayed in the cave for a few days or weeks. The group waited for her to recover. Then, back to work. A woman had no right to be weak. The tribe would not wait. A Neanderthal mother had no cradle, no diapers, no warm blanket. The baby was wrapped in a hide and carried on her back or chest. Near ancient hearths, archaeologists find tiny footprints, finger marks, fragments of bone toys. Children were always close. The baby was breastfed. There was no other option. If a mother died in childbirth, the infant's chance of survival was nearly zero. But if there was another nursing woman in the group, she might take the baby as her own. This did happen. In small groups, everyone depended on each other. When the child reached about a year old, they were given extra food, chewed meat, berries, soft roots. A mother could not nurse for several years. She needed to become pregnant again. Women gave birth often because child mortality was high. Caring for children was hard. There were no medicines, no warm water. If a child got sick, they might just keep him near the fire and wait, or not wait. Archaeologists find tiny children's graves, carefully lined with stones, with ochre and flowers. This means even the youngest were mourned. But if a child survived, they quickly became part of the tribe. By age 3 or 4, they already knew stone, fire, blood, and fear. A Neanderthal woman did not sit by the fire all day with a baby in her arms. Her work was constant. She gathered berries, nuts, edible roots. She tended the fire. Letting it die meant everyone would freeze at night. She cleaned hides, cut meat, boiled fat from bones, helped divide the hunt. She did not hunt large animals, but could join drives, help with traps, finish off wounded prey. If the men went far, women remained in charge of the camp. They had to protect the children, the supplies, and themselves. The danger was not only predators. Strangers could come too. Women taught their daughters from an early age. A girl of 5 already helped her mother, holding meat, gathering firewood, cleaning hides. By 10, she knew how to handle fire, where to find berries, how to survive if the tribe moved on. Knowledge was not passed through books, only through work, gestures, and looks. Women had to do everything: treat wounds, scare off wolves, make ornaments, watch the young. If there was an elder woman in the group, she knew more than anyone. In her mind were paths, hunting grounds, recipes, rules. Without her, the tribe might not survive. Women's work was invisible from afar, but it held life together while the men brought back meat. A Neanderthal woman was not only a mother and a worker, she had a role in the group. She knew who was related to whom, whose child was whose, when someone was due to give birth. She kept the tribe's order in her head, a living calendar. Pregnant women likely got more attention. They were helped, given better meat, kept near the fire, not out of pity, but because the baby was the future. If a woman died, another life was lost too. Everyone understood this. Women probably made some decisions themselves. Who would go for berries? Who would stay with the children? Who would watch the fire? In small groups, without a strict leader, survival depended on agreements. Women did not command, but they had much influence. They were respected for their experience and knowledge, not for physical strength. Did women have ornaments, special clothing? Possibly. Some sites contained beads, shells, traces of ochre. These might have marked status, a pregnant woman or an elder. Or perhaps they were just a way to feel alive. A woman was not a man's shadow. She was the one who kept the fire. Without her, the group could not hunt, could not eat, could not go on. Everyone knew this, even if no one said it aloud. If a Neanderthal woman lived to old age, that was already an achievement. Their average lifespan was short, 30, maybe 40 years. But archaeologists find female skeletons older than 50. This means they were not abandoned. They were fed, treated, cared for. An old woman in the cave was not a burden, but a storehouse of knowledge. Such a woman remembered where berries once grew, when herds passed through, where it was safe to camp. She knew how to treat burns, stop bleeding, help in childbirth. She did not need to be taught. She was the teacher. She might have had no teeth, but they chewed her food for her, gave her soft meat, herbal drinks. She did not hunt or carry firewood, but her place by the fire was sacred. These women could tell stories, teach girls, give advice in disputes. Some researchers believe that thanks to such old women, human groups became more stable. Among Homo sapiens, this is called the grandmother hypothesis. The idea that a grandmother increases the survival chances of grandchildren. The same might have been true for Neanderthals. Old age was not the end, but another form of strength. And if she was respected, even in a world where every calorie counted for survival, it means a woman was worth a great deal. When people talk about Neanderthals, they usually picture hunting and survival. But there's one topic rarely spoken about openly. Who did they mate with? Did they have mating bonds only within their own species? Or did they cross boundaries between species? It turns out that we still carry traces of them in our blood today, which means there was more between us and them than just being neighbors. Neanderthals were not the only humans on Earth. At the same time, there were several other species. The main ones were Homo sapiens, our direct ancestors, and the Denisovans, a mysterious group discovered in Siberia. There were also Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis, small-bodied human species on the islands of Indonesia and the Philippines. But most often, Neanderthals came into contact specifically with Homo sapiens and Denisovans. Neanderthals appeared in Europe and the Near East about 400,000 years ago. Homo sapiens originated in Africa, but began migrating about 60,000 years ago. They met around 50 to 60,000 years ago in the region now called the Levant, modern-day Syria, Israel, and Turkey. That's where the first encounters began. Some archaeological sites show that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens lived side by side, sometimes even in the same caves, though with breaks in between. One group would disappear, another would arrive. Sometimes tens of thousands of years separated these groups, but the places remain the same. This means they knew about each other, could observe, compare, and exchange. And this means they had the chance not only to fight or avoid each other, they also had the chance to make contact, including the closest kind of contact. Could different species have children together? Yes, they could. Neanderthals and Homo sapiens were different species, but biologically, they were compatible. This means that a modern human and a Neanderthal could conceive offspring, and these children were viable. We know this not just by speculation, but through DNA analysis. In the 21st century, scientists decoded the Neanderthal genome and compared it to ours. The result was unexpected. Nearly all people outside of Africa have segments of Neanderthal DNA, about 1 to 2%. This is direct proof of interbreeding, and this didn't happen just once. Traces of Neanderthal genes are found in Europeans, Asians, and people from the Middle East. Africans, whose ancestors never left Africa, have almost none of these genes. This means the mixing happened after Homo sapiens left Africa and met Neanderthals. There are also reverse cases. Denisovans, another ancient human species, also carry fragments of Neanderthal DNA. This means Neanderthals interbred with them too. There were even hybrids. In Denisova Cave, a bone fragment of a girl was found whose mother was a Neanderthal and father a Denisovan. This is possible only between species that are very close biologically. And it wasn't just theoretical. They lived together, formed relationships, and had children. Sometimes these children survived and passed their genes on, all the way to us. Interbreeding between species could happen in different ways. Sometimes by chance, sometimes deliberately. It might have been just physical contact between lonely individuals living in neighboring camps. It might have been violence during conflicts or the capture of women. But there's also another scenario. A union between species could have been beneficial. If Neanderthals encountered a group of Homo sapiens and saw that they could make better weapons or find food more effectively, they had an incentive not to fight, but to mix. For small groups, any new blood was a chance to survive. A Neanderthal tribe might have only 10 or 20 people. Any connections with neighbors increased diversity and protected them from extinction. The same goes for Homo sapiens. Imagine, you are a newcomer in an unfamiliar, icy world, and there in front of you are the locals, strong, resilient, familiar with the land. Why not take their knowledge and their genes? The conditions were so harsh that it wasn't the strongest who survived, but the most adaptable, those who were ready to connect, to merge, to change the rules. Love? Maybe. Humans are more than just instincts, even ancient ones. We don't know how they looked at each other, what they felt, but children came from these unions, which means there were reasons, there were desires, and there were choices. Today, almost every person outside of Africa carries Neanderthal genes. This makes up about 1 to 2% of our entire DNA. Some people have a bit more, some a bit less. The highest amounts are found in people from East Asia. Europeans and people from the Middle East have slightly less. What are these genes? Some are responsible for immunity. They help us fight infections. Others are linked to skin and hair. Adaptations for cold climates. There are segments that affect blood clotting, pain sensitivity, even the tendency toward depression and insomnia. Some genes increase the risk of type 2 diabetes or severe COVID-19. Others, on the contrary, offer protection. This doesn't mean we are half Neanderthal, but their contribution to our bodies is real. It's not just a memory, it's working mechanisms inside our cells. They have been passed down from generation to generation for tens of thousands of years. Sometimes these genes are switched off. Sometimes they are active. But the fact remains, we are not pure Homo sapiens. We are the result of mixing, a hybrid line carrying traces of those who lived before us. Somewhere inside, you may be a gene that helped a Neanderthal stay warm in an icy cave, or fight off a disease that killed others. This is not just history. It is part of you. Not so long ago, Neanderthals were considered an evolutionary dead end. Crude savages who died out because they couldn't compete. But genetics changed everything. It turned out that they didn't just survive alongside Homo sapiens. They became part of us, and that changes everything. We can no longer say there was just us and them. It was much more complicated. Different human species lived side by side, hunted together, learned from each other, formed relationships, and had children. Neanderthals did not simply vanish. They dissolved into you, into me, into everyone living outside Africa. This means human history is not a straight line, but a web. It's made of encounters, mergers, and mutual influences. We are not a pure breed. We are the result of mixing, and in that lies our strength. Each of us carries ancient knowledge, gathered by different species. And if today you can live in the cold, fight off infections, or sense the smell of snow, perhaps you owe that not only to Homo sapiens, but to a Neanderthal who once reached out a hand to a stranger, or to a strange woman. We are not descendants of conquerors. We are descendants of those who knew how to adapt. And that is what made us human. Neanderthals lived for hundreds of thousands of years. They survived the freezing cold of the Ice Age, hunted large animals, and buried their dead. But one day, they disappeared. Around 40,000 years ago, they were no more. Why? Science doesn't have one answer, only theories. But together, they paint an accurate picture of their disappearance. Neanderthals appeared and developed in cold conditions. The Ice Age was the norm for them. They were adapted to it. A sturdy body, short limbs, warm clothing made of hides, and shelters in caves. But even endurance has its limits. Around 45,000 years ago, the climate began to change, especially sharply. Within a short period, temperature fluctuations occurred. Sometimes it became warmer, then suddenly, a harsh cold returned. These changes hit the Neanderthals particularly hard. Their hunting depended on the familiar fauna: deer, bison, wild boar. When the climate changed, these animals left, and other unfamiliar ones took their place. The forests and landscapes were also changing. Places that used to offer shelter turned into wastelands. Vegetation disappeared. In a world where every day was a struggle for food, these changes could be fatal. Neanderthals did not store food, build houses, or have long-range weapons. They lived face-to-face with nature. And when nature began changing faster than they could adapt, they started to die out. Not instantly, but slowly. One group at a time, one region at a time. Food disappeared. Familiar paths vanished. It got cold, and then too quiet. When Homo sapiens left Africa and began to settle in Europe and Asia, Neanderthals were already living there. They knew the land, hunted local animals, and kept to small groups. But the arrival of a new species changed everything. Sapiens were different. They were more slender, but moved faster, communicated more actively, and could unite forces between tribes. They had more advanced tools, including throwing spears. This gave them an advantage in hunting, being able to kill an animal from a distance without risking their lives. In addition to weapons, Homo sapiens had new ways of managing resources. They set traps, explored new territories faster, and shared knowledge. Neanderthals lived in isolation, passing down skills only within their own group. Sapiens, on the other hand, could exchange skills between different communities. When both groups, sapiens and Neanderthals, found themselves in the same places, competition began over game, water, and caves. And more often than not, sapiens won. Neanderthals might have retreated without a fight. Perhaps there were clashes. But even without war, it was enough that sapiens took the resources and left Neanderthals with fewer and fewer opportunities. For a weak and small population, this was a death sentence. Their world was shrinking. Sapiens were not the cause of their extinction, but they became the ones who took their place. Neanderthals were never numerous. According to estimates by scientists, at different times, there were only a few thousand to a few tens of thousands of Neanderthals across Europe and Western Asia. Their groups were small, 10, 20, at most 30 people. This meant that everyone was related. Tight family connections within the tribe led to a decrease in genetic diversity. This is dangerous. Children inherit the same weaknesses, immunity becomes vulnerable, and any disease strikes everyone at once. The smaller the group, the harder it is to recover after losses. If 3 out of 10 die during a hunt, it's a catastrophe. If few children are born, there's no future. If one group dies out, its knowledge and genes disappear forever. Sapiens were able to form alliances between different tribes. Neanderthals could not. They lived in isolation. When conditions worsened, they had neither a reserve of people nor external support, and that meant there was no way back. This is called a genetic dead end, when a species doesn't die out instantly, but simply fades away. With each generation, fewer healthy children, fewer hunters, fewer chances. Neanderthals didn't die in battle. They simply couldn't reproduce fast enough to survive. When Homo sapiens arrived in Europe, they brought not only new technologies and behaviors, but also diseases. As is the case today, when different populations come into contact, viruses start to spread. Only sapiens had immunity to these diseases, while Neanderthals did not. Even a common infection, harmless to one species, could be deadly to another. Neanderthals had lived in isolation for hundreds of thousands of years. Their immune system was not prepared for new pathogens, and now there were strangers nearby, with new microbes, bacteria, and parasites. We won't find a virus under a microscope in an ancient bone, but we can see that the population began to sharply decrease after contact with sapiens. This may have been linked not only to competition, but also to epidemics. In a small group, a single disease could wipe everyone out. Without medicine, without understanding what was happening. There is a theory that even one infected sapiens could have infected dozens of Neanderthals simply by living nearby, and they would have died without knowing the cause. Combined with the bad climate and hunger, diseases became the final blow. It wasn't military camps that disappeared. It was families. Not by sword, but by fever. We will never know the names of these diseases, but they could have been more powerful than any weapon. Neanderthals didn't go extinct due to a single reason. There was no catastrophe, no explosion, or plague that wiped them out in a year. Their disappearance was the result of pressure from multiple fronts. The climate became unstable. Glaciers retreated and advanced. The number of animals decreased, and the familiar hunting routes vanished. Homo sapiens appeared. New competitors, faster, more technological, and adaptable. Encounters with them were rare, but the consequences were serious, from losing territories to disease transmission. Inside Neanderthal groups, degradation began. Too few people, too close familial ties, and too slow a population increase. Groups dwindled one by one. Somewhere, a hunter didn't return. Somewhere, children didn't survive. Somewhere, everyone fell ill at once. It was a slow extinction. Not a battle, not a catastrophe, but a fading away. The last Neanderthals lived in southern Spain, near the Gibraltar area. Small groups, cut off from the others. They fought as hard as they could. But soon, there was no one left. That's why their story matters. It shows how easily even a strong, adapted species can disappear if everything around it changes too quickly. Neanderthals weren't stupid. They just didn't have enough time. Much in the life of Neanderthals seems foreign to us. Stone tools, fires in caves, hunting animals. But if we look closer, it becomes clear. They also had a day. It began at dawn and ended by the fire. Morning, caring for children, work, food, rest. Everything as with us, only without electricity and walls. Let us try to live this day together with them. The Neanderthals' day began with cold, even if they lived in a cave. In the morning, it was damp inside, cool, and smoke from yesterday's fire hung in the air. First of all, it was necessary to check the fire. Fire is everything. If it went out, a new one had to be lit urgently. Without it, no food, no warmth, no protection. Sometimes embers were preserved under the ash. One of the adults got up first and fanned the flame. While the children were still asleep, the adults inspected the camp. Were there any traces of beasts? Had the wind blown away the hides from the shelter? Was everyone in place? In a tight group, everyone knew who slept where, and the absence of one immediately caught the eye. If the hunters had left during the night, they worried about them. In the morning, they were awaited. While one watched the fire, another prepared tools, sharpened stone tips, checked the strength of spears. Women gathered leftover food, prepared berries, or dried meat, if there was any. Sometimes in the morning, they ate what was left from supper. Often, nothing. Small children woke later. They were wrapped in hides, pressed close. A baby's cry awakened the whole cave. If the night had been hard, with cold, rain, or anxiety, the morning became especially gloomy. But if everything was calm, the day began with hope. Perhaps today there would be a successful hunt. Perhaps there would be no wounds. perhaps no one would die. When the sun rose, the hunters left. These were the strongest, usually men, sometimes adolescents. They took spears, stone knives, skin bags. They went silently, light. They could walk for hours, sometimes the whole day. Hunting required patience. Track the herd, sneak up, choose the moment, strike accurately. One miss, and the beast goes away, or attacks. While some hunted, others stayed in the camp. Women and children went to gather roots, berries, nuts. They knew where and when something grew. They could notice a bird's nest, catch a lizard, dig up an edible tuber. Sometimes an adolescent with a spear went with them in case of danger. There were failures. Animals did not come. Berries rotted. They returned with nothing. And if someone received a wound, it was serious. A bite, a cut, a dislocation. Without doctors and medicines, even a trifle could become life-threatening. Sometimes, hunting turned into flight. If an animal wounded a hunter, they carried him back. If they could not, they left him. It was a terrible decision, but they had no choice. In the middle of the day, the heat could become unbearable, especially in open places. Then they sought shade, drank water from streams, burrowed into sand, and then onward again. Hunting and food search were not a one-time affair. It was every day, because every day they wanted to eat. If the hunters returned with prey, the whole group revived. Even children felt the smell of blood and smoke, and that meant today there would be meat. The carcass was laid beside the fire. The men began to butcher it, with sharp stone tools, precisely and knowledgeably. Meat, fat, entrails, marrow from bones, everything was used. But before eating, the prey was divided. Someone cut, someone distributed. Most often the hunters ate first, those who had risked their lives. Then, women with infants, then the rest. The elderly could receive soft meat or already chewed food. Not one piece was thrown away. If the hunt was unsuccessful, they ate stores. Dried meat, remaining roots, berries, if there were any. Sometimes, nothing. Then they had to chew bark, gnaw old bones, simply drink water to dull hunger. There were days when only the children ate. Adults waited for the next hunt. They ate with their hands. A layout of stones by the fire served as a kind of table. Sometimes meat was roasted on coals, sometimes eaten raw. Food was divided quickly, so as not to attract predators. Someone always kept watch. After eating, the remains were removed, bones stacked separately. Meat was dried, if any remained, but more often, none remained. In the group, they ate everything, because no one knew if there would be food tomorrow. When the sun inclined toward sunset, the hunters returned. If with prey, the camp came alive. If empty-handed, it became quiet. Women met the men at the cave entrance or by the fire. By their faces, it was immediately clear how the day had gone. Blood, fatigue, wounds, or simply hunger and silence. After return work began, the meat had to be quickly butchered. The fire stoked if it had gone out. Women processed hides, cleaned, dried, stretched. This was an important resource for clothing and shelters. Children helped as they could, brought firewood, held stones, cleaned bones. If someone was wounded, the group rinsed the injury with water, packed it with dirt or chewed leaves, and offered a steady hand. Without medicine, they simply fed the injured, wrapped them in hides, and lay beside them for warmth. In the evening, the family gathered by the fire. Someone ate leftovers, someone sat silently. Elders might tell where they had been before, whom they had seen, what tracks they had found. This was not just conversation. It was the transmission of knowledge. Children listened, absorbed, remembered. At this time, the sky darkened. It became cold. Someone fell asleep by the fire. Someone went deeper into the cave. But a watch remained. Night means predators, strangers, fear. And only fire gave the feeling that so far, everything was still all right. Night for Neanderthals is not silence and peace. It is a time of fear. When the sun set, everything around became dangerous. Sounds intensified, beasts came out to hunt, and any sound could mean death. Therefore, the fire must never go out. It was the center of the camp. Protection from predators, warmth, and light. 1 or 2 adults remained by the fire, sentinels. Their task was to maintain the flame, listen, be ready to wake everyone in case of danger. The rest slept, closer to the fire, children and elders, farther, hunters. They slept on hides, huddled together, covered with hides over their heads. Sometimes, together with dogs, they were the guards. The cave gave protection, but amplified echo. Creaks, drips, rustles. Everything seemed closer. If another group was nearby, the night could end with a raid. Neanderthals were cautious. No one spoke loudly, laughed, or sang. Only rare conversations by the fire, in whispers. Sometimes at night, children were born. Sometimes the sick died. Everything happened by the fire. Sometimes the night was calm. Then one could breathe a little, but no one could fully relax. Even in sleep, a hand reached for a spear. Thus passed the night, in darkness, in tension, with hope that dawn would still come, and with it, another chance to survive. When we think of primitive people, we most often imagine a struggle for survival, where the weak are abandoned and the sick go untreated. But archaeology tells a different story. Neanderthals were not soulless hunters. They knew how to care. They were not afraid of weakness. They fed the injured, looked after the sick, and waited until they were back on their feet. And sometimes, they simply did not leave anyone to die alone. What we know about how Neanderthals treated the sick comes not from stories, but from their bones. Archaeologists have found skeletons with severe injuries that had healed. This means the person did not die immediately. He was not abandoned. He was cared for. One of the most famous examples is the skeleton of a man from Shanidar Cave in Iraq. He had a broken arm, a damaged eye, and partial paralysis on the right side of his body. He was blind in one eye, moved poorly, and could not hunt. But he lived for decades. Someone fed him, protected him, and kept his place clean. Without help, he would not have survived even a few weeks. Another example is a Neanderthal without teeth, completely, yet his bones show no signs of starvation. He lived to an old age. This means someone chewed food for him, gave him soft meat, fed him. This is no accident. This is a system. On other skeletons, researchers found traces of healed fractures, dislocations, and damaged joints. Some injuries were so severe that the person lost the ability to hunt for a long time. But he was not abandoned. He returned to the group. He was not weak, but a needed member of the group. These bones are not just remains. They are evidence that Neanderthals had what makes us human: care for those nearby, Caring for an injured or sick person did not fall on one individual. For Neanderthals, the group was everything. If someone in the tribe was injured, he was not abandoned. Everyone who could helped him. First and foremost, the women. They often stayed in camp, knew how to prepare food, tend the fire, make shelter. They had experience caring for infants, so they knew how to care for adults as well. But not only women helped. Older men, those who no longer hunted, could assist, watch over the sick, bring water, keep the place by the fire in order. The group had no doctors, but it had a distribution of care. Everyone did what they could. Even adolescents could be useful. Fetch firewood, bring food, drive away animals, be the eyes and ears for adults. Care was communal. If it fell on one person, no one would cope. But when everyone helps, more survive. It is important to understand. Survival in such conditions is not about pity. It is about calculation. One injured hunter might, in a month, hunt again. One mother could raise 3 children. An old man might know the road to water. Therefore, they fought for them. Neanderthals knew how to share meat, fire, and warmth. But most important, they knew how to share responsibility for those who could not stand. And that made them human. Care for the weak among Neanderthals is not just kindness, it is a strategy. Every person in the group had value. A good hunter could bring meat. An old woman knew where berries were. A youth could grow into a strong warrior. The loss of even one was a blow to the entire group. If a wounded man were left behind, tomorrow they would hunt 3 instead of 4. If a woman after childbirth were not saved, there would be no next generation. If an elder were not helped, no one would know where to hide from winter. In small groups, survival depended on everyone, and so they saved even those who could not walk. They were not a burden, they were part of the team. And after a month or 2, they could stand beside their companions again. Moreover, care united the group. When one person feeds another, a bond forms between them. This is not just instinct. This is trust. Such groups lasted longer, acted more cohesively. They knew, if you fall, you will be lifted. Sapiens perhaps prevailed because they exchanged knowledge better. But Neanderthals survived because they held on to each other. This is not altruism. It is a calculated understanding. Together, there is more chance than alone. Care is a weapon, quiet but strong. For many years, Neanderthals were considered primitive savages, strong but stupid. It was said they died out because they were weak-minded. But archaeology tells a different story. Caring for the sick, helping the injured, tending the helpless, all of this shows that they had empathy. They understood that another person suffered, and they did something to make it easier. This is no longer just survival. This is humanity. It is what connects them with us. Animals have almost none of this. Even apes, rarely. But Neanderthals had it. Their care was not showy. There were no words, no rituals, only actions. Handing over food, laying down a hide, supporting, waiting. Sometimes for months. And that changes everything. It means they had not only bones, but feelings. Not only strength, but compassion. They could fear, suffer, miss, love. Perhaps not in the same way as we do, but certainly not like beasts. Neanderthals died out but left a trace. In genes, in tools, in us. But perhaps the most important thing they left is proof that care began long before civilization. And that is what made us human. In the prehistoric world, every day was a struggle for survival. It would seem that those who could no longer hunt or walk became a burden. But archaeology tells a different story. The elderly were not abandoned. Even if they had no teeth, even if they couldn't stand, they were fed, kept warm, and held close. Why? Because they were more important than they seemed. Among Neanderthals, old age came early. The average lifespan was around 30 years. Living to 40 was considered rare. And if someone lived past 50, that person was already considered old, and such finds exist. Archaeologists have discovered skeletons that show the person lived a long life. Their joints were worn down, all their teeth were gone, bones had fused after severe fractures. But they lived. This means that in the tribe, there were people who could no longer hunt, could no longer walk with the others, could no longer chew meat. They did not bring food, did not fight, did not carry loads, and yet there were living people next to them. Someone fed them, someone dragged them during migrations, someone chewed food and passed it on to them. In the modern world, this may seem normal, but for the Stone Age, it was an exception. In animals, old individuals are either driven out or die on their own. Not so among Neanderthals. The elderly stayed in the group, and the longer they lived, the more their bones told that story. They were part of society. Even when their bodies failed them, they were not cast out. That means they had another kind of value, and the group understood this. And if they understood it, that means they were capable of more than just survival. An old person in a Neanderthal tribe was neither a hunter nor a warrior. Their body could no longer cope. They couldn't chase prey, haul meat, or chop wood. But they had something the young didn't: memory. They remembered where the herds had been last year, remembered which stream didn't dry up even in summer, remembered who had died, who had been born, who once survived where others had perished. The elderly could help at camp, not physically, but with knowledge, advising how to sharpen tools better, how to clean a hide, where to find the right herb. They had seen hundreds of hunts and knew when it was worth waiting and when it was time to go. The young listened, not because they were afraid, but because the elders were right. They could care for infants while the mother gathered roots, could keep the fire going while the others hunted, could tell a story by the fire, not for entertainment, but so others wouldn't repeat the mistakes of the past. Homo sapiens have the so-called grandmother hypothesis. The idea that children's survival increases when a grandmother is nearby. This might have been true for Neanderthals as well. The elderly weren't dead weight. They were guides, from the past to the future. Their strength was in words, in gestures, in memory. And sometimes, that strength was enough to save the entire tribe. A toothless old man cannot eat meat. The skeleton of a Neanderthal from France, an elderly man who had no teeth left, shows that he lived a long time. How? He was fed, given soft food, chewed by others, given herbal infusions, brought water. He wasn't abandoned. That means he was cared for. Care was simple but constant. Cover with a hide, give a drink, move closer to the fire. If needed, help him stand. Wash a wound. Place a hand on the forehead. Care means actions repeated day after day. That's impossible without a desire to help. Care was usually provided by women, especially the older ones. They had experience, patience, understanding. But not only them. In a small group, care was shared by everyone. Children could bring water, men, meat, Teenagers, firewood. The old man couldn't give strength, but he could receive warmth. Sometimes he was simply left to live in the center of the camp, closer to the fire, closer to the children. He wasn't in the way. He was one of them. He didn't need to be saved. He just wasn't cast out. What seems natural to us today was a rarity in the ancient world. But Neanderthals lived to old age. And that means someone beside them made the choice every day to stay close. In the Stone Age, every member of the group had to be useful. Otherwise, death for the whole community. But the elderly, even if they couldn't walk, were useful in other ways. Their experience was navigation through the past. They remembered where food had been found during drought. They remembered how to treat a wound that would have killed the inexperienced. When everything changes, climate, prey, dangers, the one who remembers the past becomes the most important. The elderly could compare. This has happened before. The animals went that way then. This water causes illness. Their words weren't guesses. They were knowledge earned through pain and time. Besides knowledge, they gave the tribe stability. As long as the elders lived, the group felt anchored to something solid. It was psychological support. A tribe without elders is like a tree without roots, all young. No one knows what to do if things go wrong. They helped, not with their hands, but with their minds. Even just sitting by the fire, they connected generations. They passed on not just facts, but the rhythm of life, rules, boundaries, things that can't be explained in words, but can be shown. Without the elderly, the group lost its memory. And without memory, survival was impossible. If a tribe takes care of those who can no longer work, that says a lot about it. It means Neanderthals weren't just surviving animals. They had structure. They understood that old age wasn't the end, but a different kind of usefulness. Their society had memory, continuity. That means there was respect for age, not out of pity, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Without those who remember, you can't build anything. And even though they left behind no writing or temples, they left something more important, a human attitude. They could have abandoned them, but they didn't. They could have walked away, but they stayed. That speaks not just of attachment, but of the understanding that strength is not always in youth. Sometimes strength is in the one who sits by the fire and says, "I've seen this before." Neanderthals are gone, but their bones still tell us that they weren't alone. The old lived out their days alongside others, and that is almost the most important thing, because caring for children is instinct, but caring for the old, that's a choice, and they made that choice thousands of years ago, without words, simply because it was the right thing to do. Neanderthals were hunters, but in their arsenal, there were no bows, no thrown spears from afar, no deep traps. Everything happened up close. Their hunting was not about strategy. It was head-on. Close combat, risk, severe wounds, all for meat that could feed the group for at least one day. Neanderthals didn't know bows and arrows. They had no iron, no long spears with ropes, no throwing machines. Their weapons were simple, but deadly at close range. The most important was a short spear with a sharp stone tip. Such a spear wasn't thrown from a distance. It was used at point-blank range, sometimes even held with both hands. It was a tool for close combat. The tips were made of stone, often flint. They were chipped in a special way to produce a sharp, durable edge. Sometimes the tip was fastened to a wooden shaft using resin and sinew. The stone pierced the animal's flesh, broke inside, and left deep wounds. In addition to spears, Neanderthals had clubs, heavy sticks with a thickened end. These could be used to strike the head or knock an animal down. There were also short stone knives for finishing off or butchering the carcass. Their weapons didn't look elegant. They were rough, heavy, but effective. This was not ambush weaponry. It required getting close and surviving. Every hunter knew his spear. He made it himself, sharpened it, tested it. It was an extension of his hand, and without it, death. Because not even a Neanderthal could fight a boar or bison barehanded. Hunting for Neanderthals wasn't just fighting an animal. It was tactical. Without bows and traps, they had to use terrain, wind, and coordination. They knew animal behavior, understood where they would run, how they reacted to noise, and where they could be cornered. One of their main methods was drive hunting. Several hunters approached from one side and drove the animal toward others who were already waiting. These could be narrow gorges, cliffs, rocky traps, or boggy areas. There, the animal slowed down and was finished off. In caves and near camps, piles of bones from multiple animals had been found, possibly driven off cliffs. Such hunts required coordination, planning, and signals, not verbal, gestures, shouts, noise, which means they could act as a team. They could also sneak up from ambush. For example, to a lone animal drinking from a stream. One distracts, the other strikes from the side. Everything happened quickly. A blow, and then a quick retreat. If the animal didn't fall, it had to be fled from. There was often no second chance. The larger the prey, the more people were needed. Neanderthals didn't face a mammoth alone. But if the tribe was starving, the risk was worth it. Their tactics were simple, but effective. Not about elegance, about survival. When the animal was cornered or approached, combat began. It was close contact, almost hand to hand. Neanderthals had no chance of hitting from afar. They struck with the spear directly into the body, side, neck, belly, sometimes even mid-leap. If the blow didn't kill immediately, the animal struck back. A boar could tear open a belly with its tusk. A deer could knock someone down. A bison could trample. Neanderthal skeletons show broken ribs, crushed skulls, shattered collarbones. These are the marks of such battles. The blow was only the first stage. Then came the kill, often with a knife or club. This happened in dust, shouting, blood. It wasn't pretty, but without it, there would be no meat. Sometimes one hit, others held the animal down. Sometimes they took turns striking. It depended on the beast. Sometimes they wounded, but the animal escaped. Then they followed the trail, the drops of blood. This could take hours, but they couldn't give up. Meat was needed at any cost. There were cases when hunters died from wounds. They were either carried back or left behind if they couldn't be moved. This was hunting without room for error. A Neanderthal going into battle knew he might not return today, but he also knew if he didn't go, others would die. So he went and struck first. What we know about Neanderthal hunting isn't fantasy. It's all backed by finds. Archaeologists have discovered numerous sites where, next to animal bones, there are fragments of stone tools, traces of fires, bloodstains in the soil. These are real hunting sites. In animal bones, they found embedded spear tips, stone blades deeply lodged in ribs, pelvic bones, skulls. This means the blow came from close range and with great force. Some bones are fully pierced, even in large animals, which means the weapons were powerful. There are camps where skeletons of several animals of the same species lie together. This suggests mass hunts, likely drive hunts. Animals were driven off a cliff or into traps. There they were finished off. Below, a pile of bones. Above, tracks and rocks. This isn't coincidence. It's hunting strategy. On human skeletons, numerous injuries. Fractures, dislocated shoulders, skull cracks. Some healed, meaning the person survived. Some were fatal. This was the price of hunting. Everything points to the fact that meat came through pain. No fantasies, just facts. Traces of blows, blood, tools, burns. Neanderthals took risks, and archaeology proves it. The way Neanderthals hunted, it wasn't savagery. It was a conscious choice. They had no long-range weapons, no horses, no nets. But they still went out to hunt, and their hunt was a fight, which means they weren't just strong, they were brave. To get close to an animal, you have to know how not to be afraid. You have to be ready to die. Neanderthals weren't reckless. They knew what they were doing. Their bodies were specially adapted. Strong bones, powerful arms, short but strong legs. That's not chance. It's evolution for close combat. Their brains were no smaller than ours, which means they planned, chose routes, coordinated. Without teamwork, hunting would have been impossible. They read the terrain, noticed tracks, understood animal behavior. This wasn't instinct. It was experience. And most importantly, they did it not for glory, not for adrenaline, for meat, for family, so that children wouldn't starve, the fire wouldn't go out, and tomorrow would still come. Their hunting was a form of care. Neanderthals disappeared, but their strength and mind remain in us. We are descendants of those who survived, not through weapons, but through willpower, and their hunting proves it.